Okay, there we go. Okay, want to make sure that I have everybody on here. That was a little unsettling at first. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dwayne Gill, and I'm going to be your moderator for today for the Champions of Change seminar. Along with me is going to be a Sherri Masson. And I've got some echo in my ear here. Hold on here. I just can't get rid of it. But I'm going to introduce myself. I'm with the Governmental Consulting Services Incorporated. I'm a lobbyist for End Gun Violence Michigan. And I care about gun violence because I'm a retired Michigan State Trooper. And this is very near and dear to my heart. Sherri, you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll allow everyone on the panel to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Dwayne. My name is Sherri Masson, and I'm part of the leadership for Indivisible Huron Valley in West Oakland County. And I represent statewide Indivisible Michigan on the End Gun Violence Michigan Steering Committee. I got my start in gun violence prevention in 2000 when I rode a bus to DC, Washington, DC, and joined the Million Mom March, which became a movement from that march. And for 10 years, I worked with what became Brady United to prevent gun violence in Michigan. Since 2017, I've had a leadership role with Indivisible, and early on, Indivisible named ending gun violence as one of our top priorities. So I'm proud to be part of this summit and to co-moderate with Dwayne today. So you can get it started, Dwayne. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, welcome to Champions of Change panel. We're here to celebrate some of the lawmakers who have helped make this incredible past year for gun violence legislation happen. These laws are, I'm still getting a lot of feedback from another seminar. If we have someone that could maybe fix some of this tech. Is anyone else hearing this? Okay. I'm getting a whole nother, hold on one second. Let me get rid of this here. Something's coming in on me somewhere. Okay, there we go. Okay, I got it. Sorry about that. Okay, can everyone hear me now? Okay, great, I'm sorry. I got it all taken care of. The laws that were enacted this year are enormously popular, but it took a lot of work and under the pressure and face of tragedy to make them real. Many of us are advocates working on the outside, making arguments, raising the profile of these issues. But at the end of the day, we need champions in the legislature who are willing to sponsor bills and vote with us. We are very convincing, but your name is on the lawn sign. So first, we want to thank you for your hard work. You made history last year, and I know you're going to continue to do so. So first, I'd like to just give everyone an opportunity to do extended introductions. Please tell us who you are, why you're passionate about these issues of gun violence, and what your role was in passing this legislation. And we can start out with Representative Hope.
Thank you. I'm Kara Hope. I represent the 74th House District, which is South Lansing and Delhi Township, so very, very close to the capital. And I'm in my third term, so I think I'm unique on this panel in that. I've been part of, Gun Violence Prevention Caucus, which has had different names over the years, but ever since I started in 2019. So, the reason, and I'll just say this right off the bat, the reason we were able to act so quickly this past spring after the MSU tragedy is because of all those years of work. People had worked on it before I joined. So we had a good foundation to draw from. And I'm interested in the issue of ending gun violence because I care about people. And I want my little grandnephew to be safe when he goes to school. My son-in-law is a police officer, so I want him to be safe as well. And, I just care about everybody. I don't think anyone deserves to die like that.
Representative, I agree with you 100%, and I really appreciate your words and you being a part of this. Representative O'Neal, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us why is this important to you as well?
Thank you, Mr. Gill, and to all of our listening audience, thank you for being here, and to my colleagues who are also champions on the forefront. Born and raised in Saginaw, Michigan. Went to school and worked in the community for over 20 years. Really serving city council for 13 years, I saw just a proliferation of gun violence in our neighborhoods. 2007, started an organization called Parishioners on Patrol, which involved the faith-based community and law enforcement and relationship building. And from that, just going out into the neighborhood, talking to young people and families, and then working in nonprofits, working in correction, working in education, working with our shelter programs. I saw, even the aspects of extended domestic violence. And so I always had a heart and passion for serving families in that capacity. And coming to Lansing in 2020 with my colleagues, we look for champions with like faith and like offerings in terms of what we want to do. And here you have a good team of folks who are passionate as I am. And so, obviously coming in a minority, and me representing Saginaw County, which is the 94th district for those, to have that barrier to where I am, it was hard to get anything across the finish line. And so we worked on this for 2 to 3 years to get to this point where we are today, where passing both House and Senate and having the signature of the governor on it to make it law. It's a great feeling, and you think about the whole trajectory of our community involving our families. Domestic violence impacts not only the victim initially, but the entire family and those who love this person. And so I think this is a step in the right direction, and it's the right thing to do. And I had a lot of pushback from folks who said, well, you're trying to impose on my Second Amendment rights and all those kind of things in terms of this current legislation we've worked on. That's not the case. I think all of us can admit, those who are listening either know someone directly or indirectly that has been impacted by domestic violence and gun violence. So there you have the opportunity for us as lawmakers is to take the initiative to really work hard to keep all Americans safe that we represent across the state of Michigan. So I'm honored to be a part of this package and be a part of this distinguished team here who are working for the betterment of our citizenship in the state of Michigan.
Representative O'Neal, I really appreciate your comments, and I can tell that they are heartfelt. Next up, we'll have Senator Shink, and if you don't mind going and telling us a little bit about yourself and why this is important to you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel and celebrate some of the wins, and then also be able to talk about how we need to do more. I represent Ann Arbor and Jackson, Chelsea, Dexter, a lot of small towns and areas where people love to hunt. And I grew up in a family hunting, took hunter safety class in junior high. And the thing is that we are working really hard to address the fact that Michiganders don't feel safe in a lot of public places where we used to feel safe. We all have a right to feel safe and be safe. And so the laws that we passed address that lack of safety while still protecting the rights of people who aren't experiencing problems, who are safe to handle guns, to have their guns for hunting, and even for self-defense, which, I think all Michiganders deserve to feel safe, whether they want to carry a gun or not. And how did I come to be involved in this issue? Life. One of the things that I realized when I was sitting in committee listening to testimony on these bills is that I've been closer to gun violence in my life than I had remembered until it came back up. Sometimes we repress those kinds of events in our lives. And I think going back to when I was just in middle school and my aunt and uncle were getting a divorce, and I was spending the night at my aunt's house, my uncle came into the house, smashed almost everything, and left while we were at church. My aunt grabbed her gun, all the kids were there, and ran out of the house yelling, "I'm going to kill him." She didn't, thank God, right? but also, what if he'd killed her? I mean, like, that was a bad situation. I've been in other situations where there was gun violence, including in college, a rapist coming to my door with a gun. Eventually they caught him, but other people were assaulted. I wasn't, because we ran around real fast and locked the doors. But that person was somebody who I think under these laws probably wouldn't have had a gun. My aunt and uncle probably would have, because that was a kind of a domestic violence situation blowing up. But I think it also, and I'm not done with the list. I'm not going to tell you the whole list, but we have developed in Michigan, some people have done this on purpose, but others unwittingly, a culture where gun violence has become too widespread. I think, like the other people have said, we all know people who've been affected by gun violence. I've talked with too many survivors who've lost a family member to violence. Each murder costs about $10 million. When I was out in my district knocking doors, I talked to people who are avid hunters, people who carry guns for self-defense, an interview. And I thought that in my district, which is a pretty 50-50 district, there was incredible support for these common sense gun laws. People recognized the need. They recognized that they themselves would feel safer with those laws. And they recognized that for law-abiding individuals, it wasn't really going to change things. So that's a little bit about my story. I think we probably could all go on for hours, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about how important and impactful these laws are. Do want to note that because we pass them along party lines, that some of them aren't even in effect yet. And so I do look forward to the day when Michigan is a much safer place. I know that the young people in our state, they care about this. It's important to them. And I'm happy to be here helping to make it happen.
Senator, thank you so much. And I couldn't agree with you more. Last but not least, Representative Brabec, if you can give us a little bit of introduction to yourself and why these policies are important to you as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here with my colleagues and with Dwayne and Sherri. Thank you so much. I'm Felicia Brabec. I get to represent the 33rd District, which is not the part that Senator Shink gets to represent of Ann Arbor. So I get to represent the lower third of Ann Arbor, along with Pittsfield Township, the city of Saline, several other townships, but all the way over to Bridgewater Township. So a mix of both kind of city, suburb, rural, in the district that I get to serve. And like Representative O'Neal, I'm in my second term, and like many on here, served in local government. Prior, I was a county commissioner for almost a decade here in Washtenaw County. The first time that in terms of policy that I got to work on gun violence prevention work was when I was a county commissioner, and we were doing a resolution at Washtenaw County to encourage the state legislature to repeal Stand Your Ground. And because we did that, and this was years and years, I think this was, it might have been back in like 2012, but we did this years ago. I would have to look up the date. I happened to be chairing the meeting that the resolution was going to be up in that evening. And I got a call that morning from one of my friends who said, hey, did you know that your name and phone number, as well as the name of your other colleagues, is on the homepage of the NRA? I said, I was not aware of this. Thank you for letting me know. I went to that meeting that night and chaired the meeting. We had so many individuals come to speak publicly, but not from our community. So it was really interesting. And as many folks know, because of our laws and loopholes, folks are able to open carry in government buildings. And we're working on all those and all the iterations of that right now. But it was a really intense meeting. And so in terms of policy, that was my foray into that. Personally, I'm the mom to two teenagers. I have a 17 and a 14-year-old, and well, 17 this weekend, so almost 17-year-old. And it's alarming to me that the rate at which they have to practice have shooter drills in schools. It's just alarming to me. I remember, and I'm sure my colleagues remember, when we used to have to do tornado drills or, things like that, particularly growing up in the Midwest. But that our kids have to go to school and have to practice a man-made horrific tragedy is just alarming to me. And so that has spurred me on. In my day job, I'm also a psychologist and I have a social work degree. And so I just believe in the integrity, autonomy of folks, the right to kind of live and not be in danger as fundamental. And so I am grateful to join my amazing colleagues here in this work. I also get to, in this work, be the chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus. As Representative Hope said, there have been different names, so it's a longer name, but essentially that's what it is. And we all get to work together on this. I know many of you out there know that last year, and Senator Shink mentioned this, because a lot of the legislation that we enacted did not get immediate effect. We're still waiting for that time period to lapse, but we've passed background checks, universal background checks, safe storage for our kiddos. We've passed emergency protection orders and being able to take some steps there. But we have a lot of work to do, and we'll talk about that too. But in my role as the chair, I see my role as both kind of keeping track of what all of our colleagues are working on and moving towards, but also working with our national and state partners to understand what's going on nationally, what are we seeing, what are the trends that we're seeing, and statewide, working with our partners here, particularly in terms of advocacy. Because our statewide folks and the partners that we make here are just invaluable. The partnerships that we make here are just invaluable. And so I'm grateful to work with all of my colleagues. The other role that I feel like is really important as the chair is my job is to not only kind of hold this and kind of help my colleagues learn and provide those times for them to learn what's going on nationally, but also in the background to work, to push, to work with leadership, to push to get my colleagues' bills on the House floor through committee. I also see that as my job. And so I've been grateful to work with my colleagues. Like I said, we have tons to do, but we're here to talk about that. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Representative, and thank all of you. I'm going to hand this over to Sherri, and I think she has another question for you, Representative Brabec.
Do. Excuse my voice today. Bad timing, right? Representative Brabec, I remember testifying at the Stand Your Ground hearings. It was a very frustrating process. Yeah, so that memory of yours struck a chord for me. So you've all have come to this and care about this issue so deeply from different experiences that you've had in your life and professionally as well. Thinking back on this last year, were there any particularly impactful moments that really stand out to you during this process of just thinking in the last year? What impacted you personally? What were those memorable moments for you? Maybe we'll start with Representative O'Neal this time.
Thank you, Sherri. I mean, when you think back, this process has been 2 to 3 years, and we did a lot of advocacy in terms of going out to the community, having town halls, and just talking to people. And really, what really struck a chord for me, just that I remember to today, is just some of the stories. Listening to the victims and their families, and looking at the families, the kids that were there. And I have 3 daughters. I'm a dad, with 3 daughters, and my wife and I, we raised our daughters to be independent, and forward thinking and all that. And as a dad, I always advocated to make sure when you meet someone, you make sure they add value to you and all that, and so they know what to look for. And so, just knowing how, you try to do your best in terms of instilling those things into your kids, and a lot of families don't have that the village, if you will. They don't, most families don't have the 2-parent homes, and I was raised in a single parent home. So that's not to say that you can't be successful and things don't happen, but they happen in 2-parent homes. They happen when you a single mom or a single dad. And so the facts of life happens, and you express yourself in ways that aren't productive. And not being a therapist, but my colleague Dr. Brabec can probably break this down a lot more. But just seeing just the cycle of depravity and violence, whether I was working in the school district, visiting home, doing home visits to at-risk kids that I had a caseload for. And when I would walk into those homes, mom or dad may have been addicted to alcohol or drugs. But another thing that stood out to me that I always remember is it didn't matter what the plight of that mom or dad was. They always wanted the best for their son or daughter. And the little dignity that they had, I always remember someone told me, always leave the dignity the little dignity that person had intact, meaning you listen, you're not judgmental, your body language is the point that I'm here for you. And so it's just a series of life events for me. I spent my whole career in service, and I did it by choice. Working in nonprofits, working in corrections, working in education, and working with families. That's my career. That's what I chose to stay there. I could have done a whole lot of other stuff, but I felt that was my gift. And so in that scenario, in those different environments over the years of my career, I just built up this vigor and this commitment to make a change in the lives of people. Whether it was youth gun violence or family intervention from after gun violence or traumatic experiences or reconnecting families after they've been incarcerated for many years. And that's why I really, cherish the opportunity I have for the state of Michigan to chair corrections, the correction budget with my colleague on the Senate side. We work to try to, make life better for, not only the persons that are incarcerated, but the families associated with on both sides. And so, all those things stand out to me, Sherri, if that makes sense, just a culmination of those life experiences, involvement. And that's why it's important. We have to follow our gift and our passion.
Mhm.
And all of us are here for a reason, and we're here by choice as elected officials, and taking those bold steps to make those decisions that aren't popular, because when we're advocating for these bills, I went to my colleagues on the other side and talked and advocated, and even one in particular who sits on a chair and chairs as a member of the board, domestic violence organization. And I said, hey, I'm just reaching out to you personally to see if I can count on your vote for this package. And I didn't know what he was going to say, but he said, well, no, I'm sorry, I can't do it because, and he gave me his reasons. I said, okay, fine. Shook his hand and said, thank you. But, when I made my speech on the floor, I was almost in tears at one point because I had stories that I had heard so many times. I had a couple stories that I had in my speech, and I think I just had an out-of-body experience. I feel like I did. After I sat down, I was like, wow, But from that, 2 of my colleagues from the other side voted yes. Really. And so I would say we have to be true to our calling. We have to be true to our convictions in terms of what we vote for. When we make we all make tough votes. All of my colleagues can attest to that. And there's a line in the sand that you have to say, I'm not going to cross that line because my convictions and my compass of life, has me positioned right here. Okay. And so that's where I was with this package of bills. I knew I had to go forward, and I'm a Second Amendment guy. I own many weapons. Actually, I'm a member of Ducks Unlimited. I co-chair the Sportsman Caucus and all of those things. I love to hunt and fish. I had to dispel that from different voices that were in opposition. And I did it proudly because I knew it was the right thing to do. And so long answer to your question, it's a culmination of things that I've heard over my career. And I made a decision when I chose this life of public service is there are times you have to many times draw a line in the sand and be a person of your convictions and what you stand for, regardless of what happens after the fact. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I'm hearing you say things like stories, hearing those are impactful. And this idea of having this passion and this commitment and having it just kind of, you called it an out-of-body experience, but at one particular moment, like all those things kind of coming together and pulling you through what could have been a challenging situation right then. It's really an interesting story. Thank you for sharing that. Senator, how about you? Can you think of any really memorable moments during this past year or so that you've been working on these?
Yeah, I'll just say too many. I think everybody who was involved felt really good about them passing. But it's not without a tinge of sadness, because these bills and many of the people who work on them are inspired by people dying, people who did not need to die. And so, when you have a lot of survivors who are working on a difficult subject, it's amazing what people will put into it. And still there's that tinge of sadness. And so, obviously, well, I would say obviously, but last February, there were the shootings at Michigan State, and it was devastating. We all had, in Lansing, we were close. So many of us had some connections to the students, if not friends of friends, so much loss, so much needless loss. And, that the ramifications of those deaths and that violence are going to be felt in Michigan for many, many years to come. And for me to see the students to be so strong, and they came in and they testified, and some of them had been working so hard that they'd hardly eaten. And, they're in school, they're there to learn, they're there to prepare for their jobs. And yet here they are in Lansing testifying for this incredibly important legislation that a number of our colleagues did not support. It was tough. It was tough for them. It was tough for us, but I'm just so in awe of their strength. And then I had the honor of getting to know a little bit Martha and Rick O'Neal, who lost their daughter, Maggie Wardle, to a murder in 1999. And they're just, they were there kind of week after week, making sure that what needed to happen happened. And just to be able to be in the presence of their strength and their persistence after all that they have gone through helped me feel stronger. And like I'm crying now. I think during that time, I cried every day that we were in our Civil Rights and Judiciary subcommittee because the topics that we're dealing with are so powerful and so sad that, it's just, how could I not? And at the end of the day, because there were some awful things said by some of our colleagues, I just kept thinking, I have a vote. I have a voice in this matter, and I am representing my constituents, and we are going to vote for this legislation. And we were able to pass it. And, we've lost who we've lost. My kids and so many of the kids, all our kids, have grown up being afraid in their classrooms, running out of the school sometimes when there's a threat, and knowing that the teachers can't save them. All the drills that they engaged in can't save them. My child, after the Oxford shooting, she was in high school. She had a car, and she called and she said, "Mom, what should I do?" And I just said, "Just leave, go. And we'll figure, your teachers will figure it out later." She grabbed as many of her friends as she could, got in the car, and they left. They went to a friend's house where they were safe. Well, it turned out it was a threat. It wasn't real. It wasn't real violence, but it wasn't physical violence, but that was emotional violence. And I think so many of our children have learned how to leave places that they think should be safe, that they never feel safe. And we know that our young people are dealing with a lot of mental health issues. I hope that these bills help them regain some sense of safety. But so there were a lot of big moments, right? So we passed those bills out of committee. We hugged, we cried. We passed those bills out of the Senate. We hugged, we cried. The House passed them. And then at the signing, like, it just an incredible accomplishment. It's been years in the making. We had a signing for the first set of gun bills, and then we had a signing for the second set of bills that were the domestic violence bills that Rep. Amos O'Neal really worked on hard for years. And I didn't know, one of my constituents who I see fairly often, she came up. She was a part of the process because she's regularly threatened by her ex, and these bills may help keep her safe. I mean, there are just so many people in our state who need these bills to be in effect, to be functioning, and we still need more. So it's a huge accomplishment. I want to celebrate as much as possible, and I also very soberly say we have a lot of work left to do in passing legislation and working together to change the culture so that people don't think the guns are a solution, that they are actually a problem. And just to add one more thing, one of the things I found out that it's not a high point in my district, actually, older white men end their lives with guns quite often, and that's something that we need to work on. Some of these laws could potentially help with that. We know that if people don't end their life that first time they think they're going to, if they're stopped, which red flag laws can help with, that they will often get the help they need and go on to live rewarding lives. So I'm hopeful. We've done a lot, and we're going to keep working on it.
Thank you so much, Senator, for sharing your heartfelt feelings about those stories told by survivors are pretty impactful for everyone. And it is bittersweet. It's a success and something to celebrate, but at the same time, at what cost was all of that? So thank you so much for sharing that. Representative Hope, do you want to share any impactful moments or memories from this last year?
Sure. I neglected to mention at the beginning that I chair the Criminal Justice Committee in the House, and I had the privilege of conducting the hearing for Rep. O'Neal's domestic violence bills, and that's memorable, not in not a completely positive way, and that's because we had several victims and survivors come in and testify, very, spilling their guts really, and putting all their emotions out there, sharing their story. And then we had a gun rights activist who came up and really trivialized their pain. And that was so insulting to them, to me, to the process, to Rep. O'Neal. That's something that sadly will stay with me for probably the rest of my life. And I learned later that this person had asked the state police to arrest me after the meeting because I shut him down. He was being ridiculous, and I shut him down. And he claimed that I had violated the law, but in doing so, and he asked the state police to arrest me, and of course they didn't, because that's ridiculous. But another thing I would share is that representing South Lansing, unfortunately, we have a lot of gun violence, and we have mass shootings that don't make the headlines necessarily. We had several young people shot outside a nightclub in South Lansing during the summer, and no one was killed, but gosh, a lot of lives were changed. And yeah, I mean, I could go on too. There are just a lot of things, but there's a lot of needless, senseless death, and we can prevent it. And I'm always encouraged by the survivors and the advocates. They give me a lot of energy to continue working on this issue.
Thank you, Representative. I think you really put it, nailed it on the head when you talked about what gives us the courage. I know Gabby Gifford always has that thing. It takes courage to fight gun violence, and it really does. When you have to be in situations with people who are intimidating and you know, it's hard to comprehend, but thank you for that. Representative Brabec, how about you? Would you like to add a personal, memorable part of your work?
Sure. I mean, I'm not unlike my colleagues, right? We got to work on this and move through this together. Again, on the shoulders of so many who worked before us, you know, on these issues. But when I was thinking about your question, Sherri, I mean, the first thing I thought of, and so I think everyone has spoken about this, like, but survivor stories are the most poignant to me, and hearing them, and for me, it's also about utilizing strategy, or utilizing what is such a tragic moment in folks' lives for good, and it can so easily just swallow people, right? You know, whether it's grief or anxiety or fear, and so for me, it was, you know, hearing the stories, but also the sheer number of survivors who we all got to interact with, both that are impacted by this period, but also who have been able to work to use that tragedy to not only their own benefits, but benefit of Michiganders for years and years to come. I mean, what an incredible, incredible legacy that is. And so to work with them shoulder to shoulder was nothing short of remarkable. The other thing that really struck me, and Rep. O'Neal talked about this particularly for himself, but was working with those who are responsible gun owners. So there was a particular person who testified in lots of our hearings, you know, who he and I spent a lot of time just talking about responsible gun ownership and what that means. And every responsible gun owner, or how I would characterize folks, thought that the laws that we passed before, the ones that we're working on now, were all reasonable, all of them. Like there wasn't one person who was like, I'm responsible, but I don't like safe storage, and here's why. Or like, we just didn't hear that, right? We just didn't hear that. So overwhelmingly, the responsible gun owners, like Rep. O'Neal and others out there, you know, again, we're working shoulder to shoulder with us on these things. And so that was really poignant. And then that highlighted what Rep. Hope was saying, which was the juxtaposition of those responsible gun owners with folks who were just in a different place. And I feel, and it's interesting that you talked about this, Sherri, because this is the word that I wrote down. Like, I feel like used intimidation rather than being solution oriented, trying to work with us on this issue, like used intimidation clearly, whether it was in hearings, whether it is when all of us are walking to the Capitol and people are there with, you know, I'm sorry that I don't know all the different types of guns, but very big ones. And so I'm sorry, I just don't know them. But to me, you know, like that's not a tactic to try and become like to help make the situation better, you know, or to just discuss the situation or to try and understand why we were working the way that we were. It was to try and stop us. It felt like by any means necessary, and to use any tactic of intimidation, inclusive of having these very large guns, when we're just trying to go to work. We're just, you know, in my mind, I was like, we're simply trying to do the work of the people who we get to represent. And that's what we had to, you know, on many occasions, traverse to get there. And that doesn't even mention, you know, our colleagues who the session before, well, I'm sorry, Rep. Hope you were there, you know, when folks entered the gallery, you know, with guns. And again, it strikes me around the intimidation tactics that are used to stop us from trying to do this very important legislation. And so those are the things that really struck me. But I would say the overwhelming feeling that I had was, and I want to just go back to this, was folks turning tragedy into advocacy and hard work was just the most poignant piece for me.
And it's good that that overshadows the other.
Yep, that's right.
But yeah, I think, you see these desperate acts on the part of the opposition. And I think your point about working with the gun owners, responsible gun owners, and realizing that, this other element is a minority. And, that's it. So thank you for all of those sharing of your what is really impact for you over your journey of this last recent year. Just to circle back quickly from your introductions earlier, and I know you touched on this, Representative Brabec. You talked about the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus, and you are currently a co-chair of that group. And could you go into, I know you touched on it, but could you say a little bit more about how that group works and the kinds of things that they do?
Sure. So as chair, I get to work with my colleagues here. And, I kind of mentioned before, part of what I think is my responsibility as chair is understanding what folks are working on, helping, our colleagues who are part of the caucus understand the national landscape, what's going on, and partnering with our statewide advocates, and then helping folks, as they're working on their bills, and, in any bill, we have to kind of work the legislative process, right? All of us have had to do this. All my colleagues on here, we've had to do this. And so again, I feel like my job is to work in the background to support my colleagues to be able to get this important legislation passed. And so, the caucus continues. There are so many different bills that folks are working on. Part of what we're seeing in terms of, again, the national trends, folks are working on these here in Lansing, but legislation on ghost guns is being worked on. Legislation on manufacturer liability is being worked on. I mentioned this before, and we have passed some bills, but we have some more to go on kind of democracy and guns, making sure that those places where the people's business gets done is safe and gun free. So we're working on those. We're also working on, we've seen a rise in militia groups and the danger that they are and pose to their communities, to other folks. So that some of our colleagues are working on anti-militia bills. And then there's also some work on clarifying gun buyback programs. Folks might have seen the New York Times article with our Michigan State Police being highlighted. So we're working on some of those things. And those are just to name a couple. There are so many more that folks are working on. But it's, our group is just steadfastly staying focused on this work and being in touch with our partners on what we want to push and working together on that.
Thank you. Thank you for the work.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Dwayne.
Oh, actually, Rep. O'Neal, I'm just about to come to you right now. It's funny you got your hand up, but I know that you were a champion in the domestic violence legislation. In fact, you have been working on it for several years while you've been in the legislature, and I want to applaud you for the hard work that you've done. And I know you want to add to that, but the question that I have for you, and it may dovetail into this, is what has it been like moving these bills through the legislation for you? I mean, personally, what has it been like? Go right ahead.
Oh, yeah, I think all of us can kind of hit that note. Coming into the minority when we started, I started on my part, it was like, you're running into a brick wall on every turn. In fact, not even getting a committee, assigned to the bill and then sticking with it. What really gave me resolve was working with our partners, our stakeholders, every town and the Gifford Foundation and Moms Demand Action and so many other advocacy groups and just families who were interested in supporting this. That really just sort of kept the fuel in the engine, if you will, to just stick with it. And one thing I wanted to add, law enforcement was on board with this. The Michigan State Police, and that's, I want to put an emphasis on that. That says a lot about what we were doing. Another fact is I did some work with Oakland University in terms of talking about the impact of domestic violence across the board. And I had a lot of research data they gave me. And one thing that really stood out to me was, and I said this in my speech to my colleagues, and Mr. Gill, you can probably attest to this being in a law enforcement, environment as long as you have, that the most dangerous aspect of a law enforcement officer's role is going to the home of a domestic violence situation. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, sir. You're 100% correct. I agree with
Yeah.
that. Absolutely.
And the data supports that. And so, and I made this comment, I said, we always say we back the blue, and I said I did, and I do. And so this legislation also supports backing the blue, and so I think people need to understand that. And I think just having that support from MSU, Michigan State Police, as we did, they were at the signing and they spoke out about it. That said a lot. And
Yes.
so those
absolutely.
episodes sort of help us wing the process of not being heard and being shun and all of that, our stakeholders, our partners, and then our relationship with law enforcement who supported us all the way to the point where,
Yes.
they wanted to make sure certain language was in there that was important. Okay. And so again, it really makes a difference in terms of your resolve. We could all say, oh, well, this is not going anywhere. Let's forget it. It's going to die in committee or never get a committee hearing. No, and I think it's important for people to understand you want legislators that's going to be taking care of the business of the people. All of us have families and loved ones. Again, I said this earlier, that have either directly or indirectly been impacted by gun violence, domestic violence, and just the episode of, here's another point. One thing that we should be responsible for is making sure when our kids go to school, they should come home.
Absolutely.
They should, that at minimum, that's just a staple. Kid go to school, you expect them home. And all the episodes we've had across the country, not only in Michigan, it just breaks your heart.
It does.
It just breaks your heart. I don't care if you a staunch NRA second, that should break everybody's heart. Right? When you get that call from law enforcement that your son or daughter or your cousin or loved one's been hurt in school,
Mm.
the answer do you have for me?
Yes, sir. I
Okay.
agree with you 100. I agree with
So
you 100%.
those are the kind of things that drives us, and I'm saying us because I know they drive my colleagues, to keep working like we're doing despite the obstacles that we've experienced. And now we've only been in a role where we have the majority, right, for what 8 months or so, somewhere in there. And so we got a lot done, but we have so much more to do. And we're committed to doing that. And I think that's important to highlight, as we, prepare for the next cycle of elections, and my colleague, Dr. Brabec, talked about how important it is to not only be connected statewide, but be in the mainstream of a national message in the movement. And so that's very, very important because there's some things that are universal that we all have to embrace and do to make an impact on the worldwide, everything's global. And so when you think about federal legislation and state legislation, city, county government legislation, it all goes together. And that's why it's important to have an agenda and we're all talking to each other, right? And not working in silos. And so I think we're really advocating, and what Dr. Brabec does with her firearms committee is outstanding. We're all energized and engaged by it, and having leadership in those roles is extremely important as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative. Go right ahead, Representative Brabec.
Rep O'Neal just reminded me of one thing too. So thank you for letting me just sneak this in. Not only are we kind of aware of what is happening and connected to kind of local, county, state, national government, but many of us will be joining. There's a White House convening tomorrow on gun violence prevention. Many of us will be there, and so we're working on all these different levels together to try and, as Rep O'Neal is saying, like create this web of, of protection for folks and safety. And so, and it doesn't happen in a silo. You know, we can't just do it alone. And so it's really important that we have these partnerships at all these different levels, and that all of us are working to nurture those relationships and have a good understanding of what's happening where, and then how that translates for what happens here in Michigan and in our local communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sherri, go right ahead.
That's a real perfect segue actually into the next talking point. You're talking about silos. Everyone up here is a Democrat, and this is a nonpartisan event. But sadly, we didn't have any Republican champions to invite to this panel, and believe me, we tried. We tried a lot. We did get some Republicans to actually vote with us on key pieces of legislation like safe storage and domestic violence bills, and they should be given credit for that for sure. But I know as a as a person who lives in a very red area and does grassroots organizing, I'd like to hear about some of your conversations across the aisle that you had on this issue. I know some of you mentioned a little bit about this, but maybe you have had some specific interactions that it'd be interesting to hear about. And did you come up with a strategy that would you want to keep trying or nurturing to get some more bipartisan support? Whoever wants to start and go ahead. We start with, let's see, who hasn't been first? Well, Representative
Senator-
Hope, go ahead.
Representative.
No, I think I would pass that question on to my colleagues, because as committee chair, I see things maybe from a different perspective. Unfortunately, the Republicans on my committee are pretty much entrenched, and I can't say that with 100% certainty that they always vote against gun violence prevention bills, but that's been the experience in the committee. And if they're not voting no, they're passing, which is basically signaling that they'll vote no when things come to the floor. Particularly disappointing because all those folks are former law enforcement. So, I mean, I'll let somebody else say something positive about bipartisanship.
Feel free. Anyone want to jump in? Go ahead, Senator Shink.
So I think, one of the things, I'm going to answer the question a little differently than you asked it. So I hope that works out. I did try to have a few conversations with colleagues, but I didn't find them very productive. And what I can say is in the Senate Committee, Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, where we were considering these bills, not the domestic violence bills, although there was some spurious testimony there too. But what one might think of as kind of the Republican testimony was ludicrous. There was an organization from out of state with people testifying from out of state who were clearly lobbyists and not against lobbyists, but they said things that weren't true, that the data doesn't back up. And so it was frustrating. And that was one of those times where I just kept reminding myself, we have the vote, right? We know that over, over 70% of all Michiganders supported those bills. And so I went back to the conversations that I'd had in my district with people who said, I'm a Republican, but I'm an independent voter and I'm going to vote for you because these things are important. And so I know that this is nonpartisan. I think this issue should be nonpartisan. This is about saving people's lives. I think when we go out into the districts and people talk about it, people don't care about the politics or is it an R issue? Is it a D issue? A lot of people really just care about being safe. And I feel like this is an issue that crosses party lines. I don't know that some of the elected officials realize that yet. And I hope that their constituents will help them understand, because this is an issue for all Michiganders. Bullets do not care what political party a person adheres to.
Well put. Thank you.
You know, oh,
Representative
go ahead.
O'Neal?
Thank you, Sherri. And just to agree with what my senator had said in terms of, just the ability to communicate to the human soul. Okay, whether you're a staunch gun owner or not. I mean, getting to the heart of the person. It could be your family next. It could be your cousin, relative. I think that really transcends, this staunch position that one takes. And I've looked at some of the facial expressions of some of my colleagues when I would go to them personally and ask for their support to be a co-sponsor of some of this legislation. And they'll give me that like 2-minute pause stare, like they're processing, like saying, and I'm interpreting it as, man, I know this is the right thing to do, but I just can't do it because there's so many other, factors that they have to answer to because of that position. And I've seen that more than not, and my colleagues can attest to that. Some of them want to do it, but they just can't do it because of those extenuating pressures that they have to face. And so, again, you have to have that, whether you're an RD, doesn't matter. And there have been some, like the two that voted on my package, they got heat. The guy, one of them came and told me, said, Rep. O'Neal got a lot of hate mail after I made that vote. I said, well, he said, but it was the right thing to do. And so I thanked him. And then my colleague that I went to that I knew was on the domestic violence abuse program in my region here. I said, I just knew that he was going to support this. You're on the board of directors. And I'm saying to myself, how do you explain that to your constituents? I mean, what type of rhetoric can you say to me, if I'm on, your domestic violence board of directors and I support domestic violence, what can you say to me to convince me that you made the right decision as a constituent? So that's, they really, my colleagues put themselves in sort of a really silo position when they stand that way, and you're not really open. And there are some things that are more conservative that I've supported because it was the right thing to do. And I think for us as legislators, it's important that we don't be extreme on the left or extreme on the right, but we work in the middle, and that's what this legislation, it gives everyone an opportunity to work in the middle because it's the right thing to do for people. And so for me, a person of just, not perfect, but I try to be true to the compass of, what I believe in terms of what's right and wrong. Again, not perfect. And I go to sleep on that. I look at myself in the mirror on that. Every day I try to think of, at the end of the day, I recount my day. What was impactful about my day that made a difference in the lives of people, for real, and not the superficial stuff. This is, I know I read a lot about King and what he stood for, and a lot of our forefathers who fought in the struggle of so many different civil rights issues and issues of people. And I know history tells us this, that in each of those examples, there's a point in life and time in our lives that we have. There's a window. And so, but it's up to us what we decide to do with that, what decisions we make, what issues we get behind, what we do, how we, all that. That's the dash between when you were born and when you leave here. It's what people remember. What I do know is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay. My dad was 98 years old and he had a 3rd grade education, but he was one of the smartest men I knew. He was one of the first skilled tradesmen in this area, coming from the South. It was only 2. He went to the General Motors plant. They gave him a shovel and a dustpan, and he was a skilled tradesman. They wouldn't hire him at that lot. But I'm saying all that to say is, this man was a man of conviction and doing right. He didn't stop at No, he did what was right. And so I have all that in me. You follow me? And so that's my compass, if you will. Does that make sense? And
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
and I try to share that with my colleagues. And for us to be bipartisan, I co-chair the bipartisan caucus. Why is that? Because I think, and I believe in, we have to start where we can start. In the bipartisan caucus, Republican, Democrats, we go out to dinner quarterly, we just talk. We try not to, talk shop, but we try to build relationships. So when we do come to these tough and controversial issues, we can start as I know Amos, oh, I know Mark, and we just have that conversation. That's important. Whether you leave there with agreement or not, but the fact that you have a relationship that you can start a conversation that's really tough, I think is important. And all of us do that. All of us do that. All of my colleagues that are here, they do that. And so that's what we bring to this whole caveat of discussions on these important issues, Sherri.
Yeah. Yeah. I very well put. And your father must be very proud of you. Will be. I'm sure he is very proud of you. Representative Brabec, you want to weigh in on bipartisanship and talking to across the aisle?
So I agree with what all of my colleagues have said. I think what is challenging is that, in the media, and unfortunately, it seems like the way that news works more and more, or information, I guess, works more and more, is that the more salacious the headline, the more interested people are. And so what my colleagues have been talking about when we do try and work across the aisle, I mean, that's not super exciting to people, right? Like they want to hear about the arguments and how people are, like fighting about something. But there are lots of bills. I feel like these less so. But there are lots of bills that we do try to reach across the aisle about. I mean, I work a lot on mental health. And so I'm, constantly asking folks, if they want to work on legislation, I'm sure all of us have had at different times packages that were bipartisan, right? We do try to do that. This, I think, for a variety of political reasons, I believe this issue is different. And it's really unfortunate because at the end of the day, to me, it's about protecting people. And I have heard the same thing that Rep. O'Neal did, but about different bills. I really want to vote for this. I think it's the right thing to do, but I can't. And the I can't is because of political forces. And I agree with what Rep. O'Neal said in terms of we all have to do, we're the ones pushing that button, right? We all are the ones pushing the button to either we're pushing that green button or that red button. And we have to decide what we can live with, whatever the issue is. We have to reconcile that within ourselves. And each one of us is faced with political pressures as well. And so if that political pressure is, for whatever reason, more important than the issue at hand, we have to grapple with that. And we have to be able to either acknowledge that. I mean, denial can be very strong, but and I think that that's part of what's happening. I mean, again, sorry, the psychologist in me seeps in, I apologize. So, but I think we have to at points reconcile that and look ourselves in the mirror. And I do wonder, like what the impact and implications will be for some of our colleagues who make more political decisions when they're away from this, like when none of us are in office anymore, when we're done serving in this capacity and are working in our communities in different ways. Like, I wonder if there will be a recalibration of that and a reconciliation around those votes. But this issue has been, I feel like it's been pretty fractured, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Representative. Thanks all of you for your comments. We've only got about 10 minutes left. I've got about 3 questions in the queue, and we'll get to that at the end. But real quick, as a lobbyist, I'm always curious to hear feedback on our work as advocates. What advocacy strategies do you all feel have worked the best for us to get to this point? Was it survivors' testimony? Was it rallies? Was it events in your district? What made the difference to make the ball move forward? And I want to start with Representative Holt.
No, I think it's all of those things together, but I find personal stories very compelling. And I also appreciate the work of kind of grassroots groups like Moms Demand Action. They're very energized and positive and committed to ending gun violence in our communities. I think they've been very effective. They lobby on their own. They lobby and they bring homemade cookies. I don't know if that had anything to do with the passage of the bills. No, I'm just kidding. But they do a great job of advocating and reaching out. And these are people that you know, typically. I mean, they're people from your community who, you know, they all have day jobs. They're not full-time activists, but they manage to work this into their lives because it's important to them. And, you know, that translates into action from the legislature.
That's awesome. Would anybody else like to chirp in on that? Senator Shink?
Sure, thank you. I think what I appreciate about the role that lobbyists can play is that they understand the legislative process, and then they can help grassroots organizations be effective within that process. Some people already have those skills, and some people can use the lobbyists to help them make sure that they're getting the right message to the right people at the right time. In this work, I have really appreciated the information that some of the lobbyists or some of the special interest groups were able to provide to us. This is information that was based on polling or scientific research, data, understanding what are the financial consequences, what are people in the community saying, maybe people we don't know. So it goes beyond the anecdotal and into the actual data sets. And so I thought that was really helpful. And then just bringing people together, I was able to meet more people from my district than I would have been able to find on my own. And I appreciated that, because sometimes, you know, in spite of our best efforts, we don't meet everybody. I have 275,000 constituents. I don't know all of them, even though I really want to. So I think that in this situation, there were a lot of people pulling in the same direction, and it worked. And I'm just so grateful for everybody's efforts.
Thank you again so much. We've only got about 5 minutes left, and I want to get to a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. The first one is, how can members of the community learn about bills that are being worked on by committees, and how can community members give words of support when the bills are being worked on before a vote is taken in the legislature? Representative Hope, you're a chair. Can you handle that one?
Sure, I keep getting called on first. I don't know what I did to. No, it's okay. It's okay.
I like you. I like you.
So to stay up to date on what the legislature has coming up before, you can subscribe to notices from committees that are of interest to you. So if you're following gun rights or gun violence prevention legislation, if that's what you want to do, you could look at the Criminal Justice Committee or the Judiciary Committee. And then in the Senate, same thing, you can sign up for notices. If you want to register your opinion, I would suggest reaching out to your own rep or senator and letting them know that you support it and why you support it. And then you can also reach out to the committee clerk. That's a place to make sure that your opinion is officially registered as part of the, the record of the meeting. So that's just a couple of ways. But I think those are probably the most correct.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I appreciate it. I'm sorry I called on you, but you're so kind, and I know that you have a lot of experience in legislature, so I thought that would be great. Real quick, Sherri, would you like to chime in on the next talking point before we get done? Looking forward to 2024. You're on mute. You're on mute, Sherri.
First time today. Doggone it, I was going to try to get through without doing that. It was in a question in the Q&A and also one that we were going to ask. And just briefly, if you could mention a couple of things, and I think some of you did come up with something before, maybe go around and bills that you think we could act on, you could act on in 2024, or gun violence bills, that things that would be kind of pushed to as a priority. Why don't we just start with, okay, good. Representative.
Go ahead, Representative Brabec.
So I can talk about, what we're hearing, all of us collectively have been hearing in our work with our national partners. So, Giffords, Brady, Everytown, and then obviously our state partners who we're here with today. But they cover everything from ghost guns, manufacturers liability, democracy in guns, community violence intervention. That's more of an appropriation rather than a policy. But we're working on that, working on continued appropriations there. And so I think those are the biggest ones that we're hearing kind of nationwide. And folks in our caucus are working on all of those different bills. But like I said, I want to make sure that folks also hear that these are not the only bills that we and our colleagues are working on. There are so many bills in this area that folks are working on, but these are the national trends that we're seeing, that we know kind of, what was really important about the bills that we passed last year was those are really the foundation. Those are the foundation that we all work upon in terms of really solid, good gun violence prevention legislation. And so now that we have that foundation laid, now we get to work on this next step. And so that's why it's really important, and all of us do that, is work with and understand our national partners and what's happening, since they have that kind of bird's eye view of what's happening nationally. And so those are just a smattering of some of the things that folks are working on.
That sounds good. Representative O'Neal, real quick. Now, last year was historic. What do you think advocates need to do to keep up the momentum?
I think you have to stay the course and finish the job. I think it's very important. I talked this to a constituent today who was inquiring about some support and resources, and they said, I've been talking to this group for 3 years about this and nothing's happened. I said, well, this is my first time engaging with you, so let's be, I said, patient, and let's work the process. And he's had a smiley face and said, you're right, thank you. But his frustration was the fact that he hadn't got any resolve. And I said in my conversation, I said, everything takes time. We have to make sure we knock on enough doors, and the right doors, until we get to the door that addresses the issue that we're trying to resolve. Okay. And so our supporters, our advocacy groups, we just got to stick with it and get the job done until it's done. And so that timeline trajectory, it varies, right? And so, and Dr. Brabec, in her leadership, has really done an outstanding job with chronologically listing all of those bills that we're working on. We have that information, so all of us know at any time what's in the hopper. And so for constituents to call any of our office and ask us those questions, we can readily get that information and communicate it out. So I think that's important to know.
Okay. You can go ahead and close us out, Sherri.
Yes. In closing, we want to thank you, our champions, Representative O'Neal, Hope, Brabec, Senator Shink. This has been an amazing partnership for those of us out in the world of advocacy, and we so look forward to continuing to make change together so we can save lives and keep our communities safe. So thank you so much for being here today and partnering with us. We do appreciate you. And thank you,
Thank
Dwayne.
you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
We'll-
Thank you,
I'll see you-
everybody.
I'll see you guys in Lansing. Have a good day.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.